Each year, the assessor's office identifies and determines the value of all taxable and personal property in the county. Recently, we sat down with Clark County Assessor Peter Van Nortwick to discuss how rising property values will impact property owners and learn what types of tax relief options are available.
Hello, I'm Jim Demo with Clark County Close-Up. Thank you so much for meeting with us.
Good to be here, Jim.
Well, we've done this before, but to remind viewers, what's the role of the county assessor?
Well, the role of the county assessor, the first thing is to value property for the purpose of taxation. That's what most people know the assessor as. But one of the big roles of the assessor is actually to protect the taxpayers, to make sure that tax districts aren't asking to collect more on property taxes than they're legally entitled to do. That's called the highest lawful levy. And so that's one of our jobs, is to protect that. And once we have the highest lawful levy, then we determine, based upon the assessed value, what people are going to pay in property taxes. In addition to that, we oversee the annexation process. So if cities are trying to annex property into the city, we oversee that process. And then, of course, we have our senior exemption and current use programs that are state programs but are managed locally in the assessor's office. So that's kind of in a nutshell what it is that we do.
Okay. So let's get into the weeds a little bit. How are property values established?
Well, property values in the state of Washington, we are told by the state legislature that we are to assess at 100% of market value. That's different than a lot of other states where they have different formulas. In the state of Washington, it's just 100% of market value. But we do what's called mass appraisal. And so what mass appraisal is that we basically take all the sales, analyze them, put them into a model, and then based upon that model, we then value all the properties. So as I try to explain to people, we're not actually really valuing individual properties. We're really valuing the characteristics of properties based upon the model that is built off of the market sales within the county.
And you do that each year?
Every single year, yes.
Every year, okay. Once the property value is established, then how is the tax rate calculated?
Well, what happens is pretty straightforward formula is you take each of the tax district budget divided by the total assessed value, and that gives us the tax rates. So when we go out and we assess the properties, we know what district they're in, right? And so for each district, we just take all the houses and add up the value, come up with the total assessed value. When the board passes their budget, they have an amount down to the penny that they ask in property taxes. They send us that amount. So it's really a pretty simple division problem. Take their budget divided by the total assessed value. That gives us the tax rate, which we then put to a rate per thousand, which is known as a mill rate.
But then depending on where you live, you'll have multiple taxing districts, like school districts, a city maybe, county, port, correct?
Correct, yeah. You'll have, say you may have a city or you may not. If you're not in the city, you're going to have, county roads. You may have a fire district. Most people have a library district, port districts, school districts, right? All those different ones each have their own budget. And so what's happening in property taxes is really dependent upon which tax districts your particular property happens to be sitting in.
Okay, so if you get a higher assessment, does that necessarily mean higher taxes?
Not necessarily. What really drives it is what is each of those different tax districts doing. And I'll give you a perfect example, right? The Battleground School District, they did not pass their levy. So even though people's property values may be going up in Battleground, the fact that we're not collecting a levy for the school district this year, this means, right, that portion of their property taxes is basically going down to zero. And so in that case, values are going up, but the amount we're collecting because they didn't pass their levy is going down.
Okay. Is there a couple part question? Is there a 1% property tax cap in Washington State? How does this work, and why are sometimes increases above 1%?
Okay. There is a 1% property tax increase that impacts fire districts, city, library districts, county. And the way that it works is that whatever they could collect the prior year, they are able to increase their collections the next year by 1% plus the value of new construction. And so that limits, right, the amount that taxing districts can increase. Now, if a taxing district says, hey, we need more than that 1% plus new construction, what they can do is they can go out to the voters and ask for what's called a levy lid lift, or in the situation of school districts, right, they'll often go out and pass a new levy. And in the levy, they'll be asking for set dollar amounts to be collected over the next 4 years in property taxes.
How can someone check to see other similar property values?
So we have what's called the GIS system, right? And so you can go in to look at your property, and you can also look at your neighboring properties and kind of see how their assessed values are, and look at the tax page and kind of see what the tax rates are in your area. And you can, so it's basically within the GIS system, we have a lot of that information. And we also have a place where you can actually go and search for comparable properties to yours in the GIS system to kind of get some sales that was sold.
Okay. So how can, if someone wants to, how can someone appeal their property's assessed value?
Well, when they get their assessment notice, you have 60 days to appeal to the Board of Equalization. And the Board of Equalization is separate from the assessor's office. We have no control over them. Remember, this is the Board of Equalization are appointed by the county council. And so they hear all the property tax appeals. And then, of course, when we go to the Board of Equalization to defend our values, what we're looking at is we look at it as we are defending the rest of the taxpayers' interest in order to make sure that we sustain the values if we feel they are the market value. If we don't feel it's market value, we may never get to the Board of Equalization because we will adjust it. But because of the way our tax system is set up, we're a budget-based system, if someone pays less money, then the rest of the taxpayers actually have to pick up those taxes and pay them. So
Right.
That's why we care to actually go and defend our assessed values, is if there's always a tax shift going on, we want to make sure everyone is paying their equal amount of property taxes.
Okay. Now, in combination with Washington State, Clark County does offer some property tax deferral and reduction programs. What are some of the tax deferral programs? How do they work, and who can qualify?
Yeah, we have our current use tax deferrals, which is like farm and agriculture. If you make money from commercial farming property, you're eligible to value what's called the current use of value of agricultural products. And so that will mean that you'll get lower values on your land values. There's also designated forest land. So, people that are out there that are tree farmers, as long as they have 5 acres of trees, they can get into the designated forest land, and then you have to be actively managing those forests because you're doing that, and because there's value to, the state overall in these programs. This legislature does offer these programs so that people can get reduction in those taxes. And then there's also deferrals for seniors and people that are disabled that don't qualify for the senior exemption program, which I know you're going to ask about later. If you don't qualify for those, you may qualify for a deferral on your taxes, which is basically a loan from the state in order to cover those property taxes. And then, of course, later, then when the person passes, then the estate has to pay those property taxes back. But that's only on the senior and disabled person deferral program.
Okay, so now let's talk about property tax reduction programs. How do they work, and who can currently qualify?
Yeah, so we have the senior exemption and disabled persons exemption program, and to qualify for those, you either have to meet certain qualifications for being disabled or 61 years of age or less. Also, there is an income limitation, which this year is $62,000. As long as you make less than $62,000, you meet the other criteria.
Per couple or
per household.
Per household,
Yeah.
okay.
So everything is based upon, the prior year. So if in 2025 you made less than 62,000 in your household, you lived in it for 6 months, and you're over 61 years of age, you should qualify for property tax reductions. And if you do, come and contact our office. You can do that online. You can mail in forms. You can come down and visit us, and then we can help get those people on the senior exemption and disabled persons programs.
And you help walk people through the process?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So you talked about you can come in person, web, appointment, all those different things. One thing about your office, we ran a story earlier about the joint lobby closure. Is your office impacted by the joint lobby closure, and what can people expect?
Yeah, so our office is definitely impacted by the joint lobby closure, since we are one of the members of the joint lobby. And so during the closure, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be taking appointments, and we will be seeing taxpayers that need to come in and discuss, the senior exemption program. We'll be taking those in different spaces within the Public Service Center, right, so that we can continue serving those people. The other thing that we're doing is we do outreach, where we go out to the different cities. We set up in their city halls, and we set it up so that people can come in and apply. And we're doing a number of those this year in each of the cities, so that we can go out and serve the people and not make them come down to Vancouver and park in the parking lot, and then go up and try to find where we're doing. So we're trying to do more outreaches to make it as easy for people to apply as possible. And of course, everyone can also apply online or mail it in, and so none of those services will actually change.
Okay. And I would assume all those would be advertised, those different sites on your website?
Yes.
Okay. So now if people want more information about the tax relief programs and those locations, where can they check?
They can go to our website, the Clark County Assessor's Office website, and look for tax reduction programs.
Yeah, it's clark.wa.gov/assessor.
Correct.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for meeting with us.
Well, thank you.